They were known across the stars as the embodiment of fear, the ones whose very arrival turned proud civilizations into trembling supplicants. The galaxy had given them many names, but among all translations the meaning was the same: predators. Their existence was a tale passed in hushed tones between conquered peoples, whispered warnings etched into ruins, carved into stone and data alike. They were not a passing empire, not opportunists hungry for resources. They were a force of nature, moving with the certainty of inevitability, conquering not for survival but for sport, dominance, and the sheer joy of crushing resistance beneath their heel. Their anatomy had been refined by both evolution and deliberate design. Towering frames sheathed in natural armor, claws that could slice through steel, eyes built to see in wavelengths most species never dreamed existed. They carried weapons fused with their own biology, organic machines capable of searing through warships and fortresses. Each soldier was both a warrior and a terror weapon, designed not just to kill but to break morale. Armies that faced them once never forgot the lesson, if any survived to tell it. World after world had fallen. Histories erased, cultures dismantled, populations either exterminated or enslaved as quarry. Their conquests were not measured in the number of systems they controlled but in how many voices they had silenced. They hunted entire civilizations, dismantling them in orchestrated campaigns that were less about tactical necessity and more about ritualistic display. To them, subjugation was not a strategy, it was a creed. The weak existed only to affirm the strength of the strong, and the strong, meaning themselves alone, were destined to rule unchallenged. Alien councils debated resistance only in theory, for when the predators came, theory collapsed into surrender. The boldest civilizations had tried once. Great fleets of thousands of vessels had risen to oppose them, bristling with technology that had seemed invincible. Within days, those fleets became floating wreckage drifting silently in the void, reminders of futility. The predators had not only destroyed them but broadcast the annihilation to every corner of the sector, ensuring that fear traveled faster than their armadas. Where their claws and weapons could not reach, terror accomplished the work for them. Even species that once prided themselves on valor and strength now submitted without fight. Entire cultures reprogrammed themselves into servitude, convincing their children that resistance was suicide. To live meant to kneel. To kneel meant at least some fragment of survival. For generations, the predators reigned, their dominance so complete that the very concept of rebellion was dismissed as madness. They did not govern with subtlety or diplomacy, nor did they seek alliances. They required only acknowledgement of superiority, a bowed head, and tribute carved from the conquered. Among themselves they spoke with certainty of their permanence. They considered themselves eternal, untouchable, a species born to rule without end. They looked at the galaxy as a collection of hunting grounds waiting to be harvested, and in their arrogance, they believed no prey could evolve into a rival. Their chronicles were filled with victories unbroken, a string of triumphs so absolute that even the passage of centuries had not tested them. They lived by a singular truth: nothing could stand against them. And yet, for all their power, their empire had grown complacent in its certainty. They no longer conceived of threats, because none had ever risen high enough to challenge their rule. Other species submitted or died, leaving only obedience or ashes. The predators had become the ultimate constant in galactic order. They shaped economies, dictated borders, and spread their shadow over every star system they touched. The galaxy adjusted itself around their dominance, as though they were a law of nature rather than a civilization. Now their attention turned to a new world, small on the galactic map, unremarkable compared to the jewel systems they had stripped bare before. To them, it was another conquest, a planet to break and bend as demonstration of power. Scouts reported its sentient inhabitants were numerous but technologically inferior, bound to a single world with fragile vessels scattered barely beyond their own orbit. It was not a civilization, they judged, but prey fattened and waiting. The predators spoke with amusement of the impending conquest. They expected no fight worth remembering, no challenge worthy of their chronicles. It was to be a routine harvest, another reminder to the galaxy that resistance was not only futile but laughable. They had come to this world certain of victory, because they had never known anything else. The predators did not yet realize that for the first time in their long and bloody history, they had misjudged. The armadas arrived without hesitation, vast silhouettes blotting out the stars, their engines casting shadows across the planet below. Entire fleets of these conquerors descended with the casual arrogance of beings who had repeated this performance countless times before. They did not waste effort hiding their approach, for secrecy was unnecessary. Fear was their opening move, and the spectacle of their arrival was part of the ritual. Every transmission they sent echoed with the same message they had delivered to worlds before: submit, serve, or be erased. Other civilizations, scattered across the stars, intercepted those broadcasts and quietly resigned themselves to the outcome. They had seen this pattern before. A new species discovered, challenged, and then reduced to dust or chains. For the rest of the galaxy, the fate of this small blue world was already sealed. The predators would feast, and another culture would be extinguished. Humanity, however, did not react as the predators expected. The ultimatum was received in war rooms and councils across Earth. Where others had immediately folded, humanity debated, argued, and planned. Politicians, generals, and scientists gathered in frantic sessions, not to discuss the terms of surrender but to weigh strategies of resistance. They understood clearly what submission meant, not survival, but the slow death of their future. Their decision crystallized quickly. They would resist, no matter the cost. When the predators demanded subservience, humanity answered with defiance. The first skirmishes erupted almost immediately. Fleets of human craft, primitive by comparison, launched into orbit to face a power that dwarfed them. Missiles streaked through the void, railguns fired with desperate precision, and experimental systems were rushed into combat before being fully tested. Against the predators' vast superiority, the results were inevitable. Human ships fell in flames, defense lines shattered, cities trembled under orbital bombardments. Yet in the midst of destruction, something unexpected emerged. Unlike countless civilizations before, humanity did not break. The predators had grown accustomed to seeing entire populations crumble after witnessing the futility of initial resistance. But Earth's inhabitants refused to kneel. Each loss became a rallying cry. Civilians volunteered for defense, industries retooled overnight for war production, and even as ships burned, new strategies were forged. Where other species had begged for mercy, humans turned defeat into fuel for defiance. The predators mocked this resilience, calling it a pathetic refusal to accept reality. Their commanders viewed humanity's determination as little more than a curiosity, a temporary display of courage before inevitable submission. To them, resistance was simply prolonging the suffering, dragging out what should have been a swift demonstration of dominance. They promised Earth that defiance would not protect them but only guarantee a harsher punishment. Yet beneath their arrogance, cracks of unease began to appear. Human responses were unorthodox. Instead of retreating into despair, humanity adapted quickly, striking at weaknesses others had overlooked. Improvised defenses slowed advances, guerrilla tactics harassed patrols, and every encounter forced the predators to exert more effort than expected. Though still vastly outmatched, the humans demonstrated something unfamiliar: unpredictability. The predators thrived on patterns of fear, on prey behaving as prey should. Humanity did not fit this script. The more pressure applied, the more fiercely humans pushed back. A culture built on survival through adversity, on centuries of conflict and invention, showed itself in ways the predators had never encountered. Even in their losses, there was calculation. Even in their suffering, there was intent. Other alien observers, watching from the shadows of distant systems, began to whisper. For the first time in memory, a species was refusing to submit entirely. The predators were still winning, still overwhelming, but they were not unchallenged. Each human act of defiance spread unease throughout the galaxy. If these fragile creatures could resist, even briefly, perhaps the predators were not invincible. The predators themselves brushed off these murmurs with disdain. They declared humanity reckless, foolish, ignorant of its inevitable fate. Yet buried beneath their proclamations of certainty, there lingered an irritation. Conquests were supposed to be swift, effortless, decisive. This resistance was unworthy of them, and yet it persisted. It forced them to fight longer than they wished, to expend resources they had never planned to use against a species so primitive. For humanity, the choice had already been made. Surrender was not on the table. Losses would come, perhaps devastation beyond imagination, but bending the knee would mean annihilation of everything they were. Better to fight and burn than to live enslaved. With that conviction, Earth stood firm against the tide, not yet victorious but unbroken. And for the predators, this was the first warning sign that their long era of unquestioned dominance was about to face something they had never truly understood, an enemy that refused to quit. The predators had always relied on the same rhythm of conquest. Intimidate, crush resistance, and claim victory. Humanity disrupted that rhythm. Losses that should have shattered morale instead sharpened resolve. The more the predators pressed, the more humans adapted, reshaping their strategies with a speed that unsettled even the most confident warlords. What appeared at first as desperation revealed itself to be a unique weapon: adaptability. Scientists worked beside generals, dismantling fragments of enemy wreckage for insight. What was discarded by the predators as unimportant scraps became sources of discovery for human engineers. Within weeks, vulnerabilities in their systems were identified: small flaws in energy cycles, weaknesses in shielding harmonics, blind spots in sensory arrays. Where other civilizations had collapsed under terror, humanity saw opportunities in every fragment of data. Tactics shifted from conventional battles to asymmetrical warfare. Instead of meeting fleets head-on, human vessels began to strike unexpectedly, using terrain others ignored. They lured predator craft into asteroid fields rigged with explosives, disguised weapon platforms among civilian satellites, and baited overconfident commanders into traps sprung with precision. Individually, these victories were small. Collectively, they were shocking. The predators, so used to flawless hunts, were forced into battles that did not follow their scripts. The first major success came when a human strike team disabled a predator warship by exploiting its reliance on predictable energy surges. A coordinated EMP assault collapsed its systems, leaving it adrift. For the galaxy, this was a moment of disbelief. A predator vessel, crippled by prey? Rumors spread like wildfire, carried in secret channels by oppressed species who clung to the possibility that the impossible had happened. The predators responded with fury, determined to crush this insolence. Yet their anger blinded them further. Every retaliation revealed new flaws for humanity to exploit. Commanders who had always relied on brute strength now found themselves uncertain, forced to second-guess prey they once dismissed. Their arrogance became a weakness, their overconfidence a liability. Psychological warfare added another layer to the struggle. Humans understood the power of fear, but they turned it against their hunters. Predator patrols began to vanish, their wrecks found drifting with no clear cause. Ambushes struck without warning, then disappeared into the void before reinforcements arrived. For the first time, predators who had always considered themselves hunters began to feel the unease of being hunted. Capture transmissions revealed their disbelief. Commanders described humans as chaotic, unpredictable, unwilling to obey the logic of survival. One recorded lament spoke of prey that refuses to know its place. That confusion grew as every defeat carried a message: humanity would not kneel, and more than that, they were learning. Every encounter made them stronger, sharper, more dangerous. On Earth, unity reached unprecedented levels. Nations that had spent centuries divided by ideology and rivalry fused their strengths into a single purpose. Rival industries merged their secrets, militaries shared strategies once guarded, and civilian populations embraced sacrifice as necessity. The predators had assumed this world was fractured and weak. Instead, the threat forged it into a singular will. As victories accumulated, however modest, the galaxy began to reconsider. Alien observers who had once dismissed Earth as another doomed outpost now watched with growing astonishment. If this species could wound the predators, perhaps the age of fear was not eternal. In hidden corners of occupied worlds, whispers grew bolder: maybe the predators could bleed. The turning point came when humanity not only crippled a predator vessel but captured it intact. For the first time, prisoners were taken, not humans, but predators themselves. The sight of a towering warlord, once untouchable, shackled by the very species he had come to dominate, sent shockwaves through the galaxy. To the predators, it was humiliation beyond measure. To everyone else, it was proof of something unthinkable. The era of predator supremacy might be ending. That single event fractured the illusion of invincibility. It was no longer just humanity's refusal to surrender. It was humanity's ability to win. Each success, each innovation, shifted the balance further. Humanity had begun as prey, small and fragile compared to the galactic giants, but through adaptability and willpower, they had transformed themselves into adversaries that even the predators could no longer dismiss. The hunters had made a mistake they had never made before. They underestimated their prey. And in doing so, they had awakened a force that was only just beginning to show its strength. The predators had never faced a united enemy. Their conquests thrived on division, exploiting rivalries among species and splintering coalitions before they could form. But against them, humanity did something the galaxy had rarely witnessed. It abandoned division entirely. Governments set aside centuries of mistrust, pooling resources into a singular command. What once were competing militaries became one war machine. Rival economies restructured into a single supply chain. Disputes that had defined eras dissolved under a common banner of survival. For the first time, humanity fought as one. This unity unleashed a torrent of innovation. Every laboratory, every workshop, every research facility was converted to the war effort. Scientists took predator technology and dismantled its secrets, discovering methods to adapt it into weapons suited to human tactics. Railguns capable of tearing through starship hulls were mounted on orbiting platforms. Orbital strikes were coordinated with precision beyond what the predators expected, combining satellite networks and artificial intelligence into weapons of devastating accuracy. Within months, the technological gap narrowed. Humanity had not only caught up but reshaped its tools for a style of warfare the predators were unprepared for. The first grand demonstration came in the asteroid belt. Predator fleets entered the field confident they would sweep aside resistance. Instead, they were met by a human ambush that rewrote the course of the war. Asteroids had been hollowed, fitted with thrusters, explosives, and hidden cannons. As the predators advanced, the belt came alive, turning into a minefield of controlled destruction. Entire predator squadrons were obliterated in minutes. What should have been a simple clearing operation became a massacre. For the first time in their long history, the predators lost an entire fleet to prey they had once mocked. From that moment, momentum shifted. Battles that had been one-sided struggles evolved into campaigns where humans dictated the terms. Predator motherships, once symbols of absolute power, fell victim to coordinated assaults. Saboteurs infiltrated their systems, AI-guided drones swarmed their engines, and reverse-engineered weapons struck with devastating efficiency. Human fleets began to meet predator forces not merely to resist but to annihilate. The predators responded with escalating brutality, desperate to reassert dominance. They unleashed weapons of devastation, leveling cities, poisoning landscapes, and attempting to crush morale through terror. But instead of breaking, humanity hardened further. Every atrocity became evidence that surrender was impossible. Civilians who had once feared involvement took up arms and resistance cells, feeding intelligence into the war effort. The predator's cruelty, intended to weaken, instead ensured total commitment from an entire species that refused to be subdued. Across the galaxy, observers watched in disbelief. The predators, once regarded as eternal victors, were being forced into retreat. The myth of invincibility had been shattered. Rumors spread quickly through occupied territories. The predators were losing. Oppressed species that had lived in fear began to stir, inspired not by their own strength but by the example of humanity. For the first time in countless generations, hope replaced despair. One of the defining moments came during the siege of a predator stronghold orbiting a gas giant. The predators had fortified it as an unassailable bastion, convinced no prey could breach it. Humanity responded with ingenuity. They redirected asteroids using controlled gravitational slingshots, turning the very environment into a weapon. The stronghold's defenses collapsed under the assault, and the predators were forced to abandon it. What had been engineered as a monument to fear instead became a monument to human defiance. Each victory carved deeper wounds into the predator's psyche. Commanders who had once spoken with absolute certainty now issued orders tinged with hesitation. Soldiers who had once relished the hunt now feared shadows, expecting ambushes at every turn. Their empire, once expanding without resistance, found itself bleeding resources and prestige. They had declared themselves the apex of creation, yet they were being driven back step by step. The culmination of these efforts came with the destruction of a predator fleet on a scale previously unthinkable. Human forces lured their enemies into a carefully orchestrated trap, coordinating orbital strikes, drone swarms, and reverse-engineered weaponry with flawless precision. In hours, an armada that had terrified entire sectors was reduced to wreckage. Transmission of the battle spread across the galaxy, a living reminder that the predators were no longer untouchable. The balance had shifted completely. Humanity, once regarded as fragile prey, had transformed into the one force capable of reshaping galactic order. The predators had underestimated them, and now they paid the price with every ship burned and every world lost. For the first time in memory, the hunters faced extinction at the hands of those they had once dismissed. The age of unquestioned dominance was ending, and the galaxy understood that it was humanity, not the predators, who now defined the battlefield. The predators who had once ruled the galaxy with absolute certainty now faced the collapse of everything they had built. Their fleets, once unchallenged, had been reduced to ruins. Their strongholds had fallen one after another. Their aura of invincibility, carefully cultivated over generations, had evaporated in the wake of human defiance. For the first time in their long history, they were no longer feared but hunted. In desperation, their council convened, a gathering that had never before been necessary. These were beings who had built their empire on conquest without compromise, yet now they argued like fractured leaders scrambling for survival. Some demanded escalation, unleashing weapons capable of scouring entire planets. Others argued for retreat, an idea that had never before entered their vocabulary. But none of their debates changed the reality. Their power was broken, and their enemies were no longer willing to cower. Humanity had exposed them as mortal. The decisive moment came when humanity carried the war to the predator's own heart. The fleets that arrived were not massive compared to the predator's former armadas, but every ship represented a culmination of learning, adaptation, and resolve. Where the predators once expected resistance to crumble at the sight of their throne world, now it was their turn to face dread as human forces closed in with precision. For the first time, the predators were forced to defend their own soil, a humiliation they had never imagined. A final ultimatum was delivered, not in the pleading tones of prey but in the measured voice of judgment. Humanity made no demand for submission, no offer of mercy. They declared simply that the predator's reign was over. If survival was desired, it would be on terms dictated not by the hunters but by those they had sought to enslave. The predators scoffed publicly, but within their ranks panic spread. Their soldiers, once avatars of fear, now fought with the knowledge that defeat was not only possible but imminent. The battle that followed was not simply another clash of fleets. It was the unraveling of an empire. Human weapons tore through defenses once thought indestructible. Orbital strikes crippled command centers, while infiltration teams dismantled control systems from within. The throne world burned under bombardment, its once untouchable citadels collapsing into rubble. Predator leaders, who had always spoken of eternal supremacy, fled into hiding like fugitives. Their legacy of dominance ended not with triumph but with humiliation. Across the galaxy, the reaction was immediate. Species that had endured lifetimes of subjugation erupted in revolt. Garrisons that had relied on the predator's reputation to maintain order now found themselves overwhelmed as the myth of superiority collapsed. The chains of fear that had bound countless worlds broke all at once, replaced with an anger long suppressed. What humanity had ignited was not merely victory for themselves but a wave of rebellion that swept through every corner of the galaxy. Yet even in triumph, humanity did not declare themselves rulers. They made no claim to replace the predators as galactic overlords. Their message was simple: never again would one species hold dominion through terror. They demonstrated strength not for conquest but to ensure survival, and in doing so, they earned a reputation that eclipsed even the predator's legacy. To resist humanity was not just unwise, it was unthinkable. Stories spread among liberated peoples, tales of how fragile prey had become the hunters, how the unstoppable had been broken. Parents told their children warnings once reserved for predators themselves: never provoke the humans. Generations that followed would not remember the predators as gods of war but as an empire shattered by those they underestimated. Humanity's defiance had rewritten the hierarchy of the stars. For the predators, there was no recovery. Their civilization, built on arrogance, had no foundation once their aura of inevitability was destroyed. Scattered remnants survived in isolation, stripped of their power, their very name invoked more as a cautionary tale than as a threat. They had believed themselves eternal, yet eternity had ended the moment they met an enemy who would rather burn than bow. The galaxy was changed forever. Where once despair had ruled, hope now thrived. Where submission had been the only language, rebellion became possible. And at the center of this transformation stood humanity, a species that had proven something no other had dared to attempt. They did not merely resist the predators, they ended them. In the silent aftermath of the war, amid the ruins of the throne world and the wreckage of once mighty fleets, a truth crystallized across the stars. The predators had thought themselves unstoppable, yet they had been stopped. They had thought themselves untouchable, yet they had been broken. And it was not by gods or ancient powers, but by humans, those who had been dismissed as fragile prey until the day they became the hunters.